After a decade of choosing a child-free lifestyle, I unexpectedly found myself pregnant. After much deliberation with my husband, we decided to embrace this new chapter with open arms. When I excitedly shared the news in our family chat, I was taken aback by my mother and sister-in-law's attempts to persuade me otherwise. They argued that my nephews would care for us as if they were our own and even handle our retirement years. However, an accidental overheard conversation between my nephews revealed their plot to make me miscarry so they could inherit our wealth. This shocking revelation opened my eyes to the greed and malice that can lurk beneath the surface. Seeing those 2 lines on the pregnancy test, my heart raced with panic. My husband Michael and I had been committed to a child-free life, carefully navigating our 10-year marriage without slip-ups. Yet here we were. Instinctively, I touched my belly, trying to connect with the tiny life growing inside me. A wave of protectiveness washed over me, and I realized I wanted to keep this baby. But such a big decision required Michael's input. After all, he had every right to know as both my husband and the future father. Distracted by these thoughts, dinner was tasteless. That night, with tears in my eyes, I approached Michael and whispered, "Honey, I'm pregnant." I bowed my head, unable to meet his gaze. Michael and I had been together 15 years, 5 dating, 10 married. Our love had always been strong. He'd immediately agreed when I suggested remaining child-free, despite his parents' objections as their only son. For 10 years, he'd shielded me from their pressure. Now, burdened by my silence, I looked up at him. To my surprise, his eyes were red, filled with excitement. As our eyes met, he grabbed my hand, his warmth calming my nerves. "Sweetheart, are you really pregnant?" he stammered. His hopeful expression told me everything. I nodded firmly and showed him the test. Tears streamed down his face as he spun me around in joy. Then, suddenly serious, he looked at me. I knew what he was thinking. After years together, I understood him well. He respected my wishes. If I didn't want to have this baby, he wouldn't force me. But I'd already made my decision. I wanted to welcome this new life with him. A lump formed in my throat as I spoke first. "Honey, I want to have this baby. I've known since I found out I was pregnant." Upon hearing my firm response, Michael pulled me into a tight embrace. "I promise to take extra good care of you and our baby," he vowed sincerely. Nestling in his broad chest, I couldn't help but dream of our future family. After sharing our feelings, we remembered to share the news with our families. Michael called his parents while I announced it in my family group chat. Moments later, my mother Emily sent a 60-second voice message. Expecting congratulations, I was shocked to hear her urging me to terminate the pregnancy. Similar messages followed from my brother and sister-in-law, citing my age and the risks involved. Staring at my phone, lost in thought, I barely noticed Michael approaching. "What's wrong, sweetheart? Why do you look so upset?" Concerned, he read through the chat history. Understanding my distress, he reminded me of our agreement to follow our hearts, regardless of others' opinions. I smiled, nodding to reassure him before heading to the shower to relax. Though confused by my family's reaction, I focused on getting proper rest for the baby's health. The next morning, a soft knock woke me. Opening the door, I found my in-laws carrying various supplements. "Amelia, did we wake you?" my mother-in-law asked gently. Their kindness warmed my heart. "Come in, I've been awake for a while." It dawned on me how Michael had limited their visits to protect me from pregnancy discussions. As we settled, I noticed my mother-in-law's eyes were red. "Amelia, you're really planning to have this baby?" she asked. "Yes, Mom. This child is a gift, and I can't deny its life," I replied. Tears poured from her eyes. "Good. We'll support you every step of the way, during pregnancy, recovery, and after the baby's born. Whatever you need, we'll make it happen." Their sincerity made me think of my own parents, who had spent the night discouraging me from having this child. Shortly after they left, my mother called about an emergency at home. Arriving breathless, I found my family solemnly gathered. "Amelia, sit down," my sister-in-law Sophia greeted me. "What's going on? Why so serious?" I asked, concerned. "Amelia, is your pregnancy real?" my mother questioned. Though puzzled, I nodded confirmation. "Then let me be honest. After discussion, we think you should terminate this pregnancy. You're not young anymore, and you already have John and William who are like your own children. Why go through this trouble?" Their words chilled me. Though I'd seen similar sentiments in our chat, I hadn't expected them to drag me home just for this. Before I could respond, Sophia continued, "Yes, Amelia, we already have John and William. 2 children are enough." Her words triggered something in me. This is my body, and I have the right to decide. Having children in my 30s is common now. My decision is final. Sophia's expression changed. "But you and Michael agreed that if you remained childless, your assets would go to your nephews. Now you're breaking that promise?" Her words stunned me. The truth behind their opposition hit hard. They saw my unborn child as competition for inheritance. Stepping back, I created distance. Realizing her mistake, Sophia forced an awkward smile. "Forget what I said. I'm just worried about you. Raising a child isn't easy." Her contradictory explanation was laughable. Without another word, I fled from this suddenly unfamiliar home. Back home, my hands trembled as I reflected on my years of supporting my family. Thanks to our comfortable income and Michael's family wealth, we'd never struggled financially. However, my brother and sister-in-law faced mortgage and car payments on modest salaries. Seeing their struggles, I couldn't help but assist. Michael, understanding my intentions, encouraged helping family. Thus began my regular support, fully covering my nephew's formula, vaccines, early education, and monthly expenses of $8,000 plus extracurricular activities. Now I realized they'd taken my help for granted and viewed my unborn child as a threat to their inheritance plans. Cold sweat dripped from my forehead as understanding dawned. I'd been helping ungrateful people all along. Clear-headed, I immediately deleted my siblings' contacts and left the family group chat. I wasn't saintly enough to continue facing those who now opposed me. A few peaceful days passed until my mother's unexpected call. Since that day, we hadn't contacted each other. Did I harbor resentment? Absolutely. But parents are still parents. Hopeful for reconciliation, I answered immediately. Instead of resolution, anger greeted me. "Amelia, how dare you stop sending money to your brother? Send the money immediately, terminate the pregnancy, or consider yourself disowned." The line went dead before I could respond. The dial tone shattered my heart. Verifying their stance, I rushed to their house, knocking repeatedly. They refused to answer. Facing that closed door, reality struck. My family connection existed only through money. With financial support cut, this door would remain shut forever. Tears streaming down my face, I laughed bitterly at the calendar showing today was only the 2nd. Normally, I transferred funds to my brother on the 1st. Their desperation for money revealed their true colors. Memories of my college acceptance flooded back. When I'd shown my parents my admission letter, they'd dismissed it, saying girls didn't need education. Only neighbors' intervention allowed me to pursue higher education. Perhaps I'd convinced myself their attitude stemmed from financial hardship. But now I understood, if it had been my brother, they'd have celebrated his achievement instead. Lost in thought, I barely registered returning home. Michael found me, gripping my hand with concern. Through tears, I recounted recent events. His fists clenched in anger while his eyes softened with sympathy. "Darling, I'll always stand by you. No matter what happens, you have me." Cradled in his arms, listening to his steady heartbeat, I felt secure. Yes, Michael had always been there for me. And soon, we'd have our little family of 3. With this realization, my worries melted away. Why torment myself and those who truly cared for me over others' issues? From then on, I focused solely on preparing for our baby's arrival, ignoring calls from my parents and siblings. I'd finally understood, their affection was conditional, their current pleas just another manipulation tactic. Time passed peacefully until one day, returning from a prenatal checkup, I found my nephews shivering outside our door. "John, William? What are you doing here? And why so lightly dressed?" "We miss you, Aunt Amelia. Mom and Dad wouldn't tell us where you were. We snuck out to find you," they explained before rushing into my arms. Despite everything, seeing their innocent faces, I couldn't help but soften and embrace them. "John, William, are you too hungry? Tell Auntie what you want to eat, and I'll make it for you." Looking at their cheeks, which were slightly red from the cold, I quickly opened the door and let them in to warm up. Then, I brought out the custard tarts I had made earlier that morning. Only after seeing the satisfied looks on their faces did I smile with relief. I thought about how the grievances of the older generation should not be passed down to the younger ones. After all, children are innocent, so I still treated them with the same care as before. As the sun began to set outside and I realized it was getting dark, I hurriedly helped my husband's nephews get dressed and then handed them over to the security guard in our apartment complex, asking him to escort them upstairs. When John sincerely invited me to come over to their place, I politely declined with a smile. The reason was simple, I didn't want to see these selfish relatives ever again. In the days that followed, John and William often came to my house secretly. Each time they arrived, I always welcomed them with an open door and a warm smile. One day, close to noon, when I asked John and William what they wanted for lunch, they both chimed in unison, "Candy apples." Watching their mischievous expressions, I couldn't help but laugh and shake my head. "John, Auntie will go out and buy candy apples for you too. Keep an eye on your brother while I'm gone, I'll be right back," I said as I put on my coat and gave John careful instructions. Once I saw him nod, I left the house feeling reassured. But my destination wasn't the street vendor selling candy apples. Instead, once out of sight, I headed straight to the underground parking garage. As soon as I got into my car, I eagerly turned on the hidden surveillance system I had installed earlier and began observing them closely. Sure enough, shortly after I left, their true colors started to show. "Brother, what kind of medicine did Mom give us? Will it kill someone?" William asked, pulling a mysterious packet of pills from his pocket and placing it on the dining table. Seeing those unknown pills made my eyes widen, and my breathing became labored. "Don't worry," John reassured him. "Mom told me this medicine only causes miscarriages, it won't kill anyone. Besides, if she dies, how can we get her to hand over her property?" Their words sent chills down my spine. I never imagined they would go to such lengths for money, let alone that these 2 children could be so malicious. "What if she gets pregnant again after this miscarriage?" William asked, voicing his concern. I forced myself to stay calm and continued listening. John smacked William on the head before replying enthusiastically, "You idiot. Do you think Mom and Dad haven't thought of that? I overheard them talking. They said this drug will turn the baby in her womb into a stillbirth without anyone noticing. By the time she realizes what's happened, the damage will leave her unable to have more children. And since there'll be no evidence pointing to us, she'll just assume it's because she's too old or her body is weak. That way, everything she owns will eventually belong to us." After saying this, John burst into laughter. Then, I watched as they ground the pills into powder and mixed it into the bird's nest soup I drank daily. The scene unfolding before me shocked me so much that I nearly dropped my phone. I couldn't bear to imagine the pain I would have endured had I not discovered their plan in time. Without hesitation, I saved the footage to my phone and immediately called the police. But to catch them red-handed, I stopped by the street to buy some candy apples before returning home nonchalantly. "John, William, Auntie's back. The candy apple vendor at the corner wasn't open today, so I went further away to buy these. Did you wait long? I lied to avoid raising suspicion since I'd been gone longer than expected. Children being children, they noticed nothing amiss. In fact, they casually tossed aside the candy apples they had demanded earlier and brought out a bowl of bird's nest soup, placing it in front of me. "Auntie, you've worked hard. Have some soup, it'll do you good," they urged eagerly. It was hard to believe that behind their innocent faces lay such evil intentions. When the sound of sirens filled the air, I finally dropped my act and glared coldly at the two boys. With irrefutable evidence presented to the officers, no amount of denial could save them from being taken away. Watching their panicked expressions, I instinctively placed a hand on my slightly swollen belly, relieved that my child was growing safely inside me. From the very first day they approached me, I suspected something was off. Just 2 days prior, my mother had called under the pretense of organizing my father's 60th birthday celebration, hoping I'd return home to celebrate. I wasn't naive, especially given the circumstances, and I knew exactly what they were up to. They simply wanted me to remain under their control, using familial ties as leverage. Having seen through their schemes completely, I refused their request outright and told them never to contact me again. I also cut off all financial support to my family. Not surprisingly, within days, the two nephews showed up claiming they missed me, which naturally made me suspicious. At first, it was all speculation. But as their visits grew more frequent and their requests for food shifted toward items like crabs and lychees, foods known for their cooling properties, I began to suspect foul play. To confirm my suspicions, I quickly installed state-of-the-art cameras around the house. Over the next few days, I observed them discreetly until, one day, I uncovered their sinister plot. Given the severity of their actions, the police summoned their parents, my brother and sister-in-law, to the station. Under interrogation, they confessed everything. It turned out that after I severed financial ties with them, they harbored deep resentment. Desperate for money, they pretended to maintain contact with me until they realized I was serious about cutting them off. Panicking, they devised a plan to use their sons to gain access to me. Having grown up under their parents' influence, the boys were groomed to be manipulative and cruel. Upon learning of their parents' scheme, they readily agreed. Once they believed they had earned my trust, they moved forward with their plan to harm my unborn child. I knew full well that my parents were complicit in this. Without their covert support, how could they have dared to go so far? Word of the incident spread quickly, causing a stir in our community and drawing widespread attention to the case. A month later, the verdict came down. My brother and sister-in-law were sentenced to 3 years in prison for incitement and attempted grievous bodily harm. Their 2 sons were sent to juvenile detention centers for rehabilitation. Justice was served, and I could finally focus on nurturing my pregnancy in peace. Through this ordeal, I learned the harsh lesson of greed and betrayal. When my parents later came to apologize, tears streaming down their faces, I coldly turned them away. By then, I understood that their remorse stemmed from fear of losing their caregiver, not genuine regret. 6 months later, I gave birth to a beautiful daughter. Holding her tiny form in my arms melted my heart completely. Years later, I heard about my family's current situation. After serving their sentences, my brother and sister-in-law struggled to find decent jobs due to their criminal records. Forced to take on menial labor, they barely scraped by. The house they once lived in had been repossessed by the bank due to unpaid loans, leaving them to live in a damp, dark basement like rats in the shadows. As for my parents, their fate was even bleaker. They squandered their pensions trying to bribe officials for their imprisoned children. Once my siblings were released, they callously abandoned my aging parents, who now wandered aimlessly, penniless and forgotten. But none of this stirred any emotion in me anymore. These consequences were merely the price they deserved to pay. Now, as my husband and I sit on our balcony enjoying the gentle breeze, watching our lively daughter run around the living room, we exchange knowing smiles. I'm grateful for the joy this little life has brought into our world and deeply thankful for my husband's unwavering love. Free from the burdens of the past, I know that the future holds nothing but happiness for us.